Hey everyone, welcome back. My name's Dom, and today it's time for another Under the Radar fantasy review. Today it's going to be Of Blood and Fire by Ryan Cahill. So like Illborn, this is another one that's been getting a lot of good attention. It's had a lot of great reviews elsewhere, but I've not seen it on YouTube as yet. So let's go find out more about both the book and its prequel novella, The Fall. So, Of Blood and Fire is the self-published fantasy debut of author Ryan Cahill. The Fall is a 95-page novella set 400 years beforehand, so as well as giving you a taste for the writer's style, it also gives you a bit of history and a bit of an introduction to the world and some of the events and the setting that you'll find if you pick up the series. I'll talk about the novella before the book, but first of all, let's go and have a look at the synopsis so we know what to expect from Of Blood and Fire. Born in fire, tempered in blood, Etheria is a land divided by war and mistrust. The High Lords of the South squabble and fight, only kept in check by the Dragon God, traitors of a time long past who serve the Empire of the North. In the remote villages of southern Etheria, still reeling from the tragic loss of his brother, Cahill Briar prepares for the proving, a test of courage and skill that not all survive. But when three strangers arrive in the village of Milltown with a secret they're willing to die for, Cahill's world is ripped from under him and he's thrust headfirst into a war that has been raging for centuries. There's no prophecy, his coming was not foretold. He bleeds like any man, and bleed he will. So, starting off with the novella, as I say, and The Fall gives us a snapshot of these events that the synopsis of the book is talking about, so the treachery of the Dragon God. It's set in a city which is in the midst of destruction, basically, with a great battle raging both in the skies with dragons fighting dragons and in the streets with mages and soldiers battling against each other there. There are 4 sections to the novella, each giving us a different point of view of the battle from both sides, but giving us the perspective of 4 different characters. And with these you get to see different types of battle as well. So where one of these will show you airborne battle between dragons, another will show you great warriors battling with swords and other weapons, and then another one will show you magic and so forth. So you get to see a good range of what's on offer in this world, as well as the different writing styles that those different types of battle call for from the author himself. The magic here is really interesting, with mages having access to the spark, which allows them to draw threads of earth, air, fire, water and spirit, and then kind of combine them and weave them to do their bidding. Dragon riders, the Dralade, also have access to the spark as well, so as well as kind of conventional battle magic, you also get to see some of its other uses whilst these dragon riders are up in the sky and doing things like using air and spirit to enable themselves to talk between dragons when you've got a bit more distance between you and you've got the wind rushing in your ears and so forth. So some really interesting elements there, all well handled. So being set in the midst of battle and showing us just those 4 perspectives of this battle, it's a really fast-paced novella. There's no time to kind of sit around and enjoy the scenery, so you don't really get to see the world. This is very much more for a feel of the author's writing style, for a bit of history, a bit of backstory, and a bit of introduction to actually what is in this world in terms of the magic and the different types of creatures and the different races that are involved and are going to be playing out the main story when you get to Of Blood and Fire. I definitely recommend taking a look at The Fall if you're interested in picking up the series, with Of Blood and Fire as book 1 and Of Light and Darkness as the upcoming book 2. It's released at the end of December. Definitely recommend picking up The Fall first, and you can get a free copy of this from the author's website. I'll leave a link in the description box below, but if you subscribe to the author's newsletter, he'll provide you a free copy of The Fall as that introduction to this world and to his writing. So on to the main event then, and Of Blood and Fire has, as a novel, it's got that extra room to give you a bit more of the scene setting so you can see the world, and you've got a bit of a slower pace to start off with to allow you to explore it and to see where you are, who you're dealing with, and to find your feet in the world. So we see a variety of settings here. We start off with kind of the village and the woods around it, moving on to see everything from kind of bustling towns to big cities and the great underground strongholds of the dwarves. We see all different races within this, so we see giants and dwarves and elves, and all of these seem well done and well crafted. There's nothing out of place. Everything has a kind of natural feel to it, like it just belongs in this world. So the way it's put across is done really well. The magic of this world seems to be explored in both more detail and less detail at the same time, which is obviously a contradiction, but we get to see less of the kind of creative, destructive battle magic here. So less of what the magic can do in all of its many different forms, and more of the little things. So we see kind of the more of a theory behind it, more of the limitations, and it's almost like it's a beginner's guide to the magic, where because we're going through the process of kind of learning the magic from a perspective of not really having believed in magic, we're looking at kind of beginner magic and the learning process. So starting small and some of the little things, how to work the magic, what to do and not to do, and building from there. So we see the story primarily from the perspective of Cahill. He's the main point of view character. There are other characters who get point of view sections, but these are generally few and far between, and they're often used to close out a chapter rather than what's sometimes becoming a bit typical in fantasy, where you will have a single chapter prefaced by the character's name and the entire point of view for that chapter will be that one character. So here most of it is Cahill, but occasionally you will have a shift, and they'll be indicated by a little separator between paragraphs, but occasionally you'll have a little shift and you'll see a handful of other characters get in their perspective as well. So the characters themselves are all well done. They all seem good, natural, quite likeable characters. So we start off with a small group, and we've got Cahill and his friends Dan and Rist as they're going through the proving, and then as they set out on their kind of main journey of discovery, if you like, we see other characters naturally becoming involved as they meet people on their travels and as they start to get swept along by the events that these other characters are instigating and going through. None of these additional characters who come into it, none of them feel like kind of throwaway characters, as you sometimes find with minor or side characters. They can feel sometimes like they're just there to perform a purpose and then they're never seen or heard of again. With Of Blood and Fire, we do have characters who you only see briefly, but of all of the kind of main characters, they all have a bit of depth to them, and although some of them I feel could be fleshed out a bit more, there's definitely the opportunity for that with later books in the series, and what we do see of them generally does seem quite natural and doesn't leave us feeling that we're lacking for a bit of depth and a bit of flavour to these additional characters. In terms of the plot, we've got a very classic fantasy feel to the story, with young heroes getting swept up into a rebellion against the evil empire. So there have been no new Dragonbound in the 400 years since the events of the Fall, and indeed there have been no new dragons at all during that period. If there were to be a new Dragonbound, a new Dragon Rider, who's not under the control of the Empire, that would serve as the spark of rebellion, if you like. That would bring people to the banner of the rebellion, and that's kind of the premise of the story, although it's buried under a couple of layers, so it's not necessarily immediately obvious that that is the basis of the story. Overall, this gives us a really enjoyable read, and for me it's a really good example of a modern author taking some classic fantasy themes and updating them for today's reader. I'm not talking by any means reinventing the wheel here, but more along the lines of taking those classic fantasy themes and refreshing them, bringing them kind of more in line with a more modern writing style, as opposed to the very different writing style that you would get where you read these classic fantasy stories that are written 60, 40, even 20 years ago. The writing style itself has definitely moved on, and often what you'll find is the themes that are being written about are changing as well. So this is a story of very much of the classic fantasy themes, but with a breath of fresh air having been brought into it. So here we have all the different races. We have elves and dwarves and giants, dragons, and we've got great mages and swordsmen, and none of this feels out of place. It all feels natural in this world because there's just a really good balance between all of those fantasy elements and then the quality of the story and the writing bringing it all together. So in terms of enjoyment for this book, and looking at The Fall first of all as the novella, the rating for a novella has to be viewed very differently to the rating for a full-length novel because there are just various elements that cannot be included within a novella, and you can't really compare a 100-page novella to a 500-page novel. So just on a 5-star scale, my rating for The Fall is 4 out of 5 because it was really enjoyable and it gave us a really good introduction to this world and all of these fantasy elements that will make up the series. For Of Blood and Fire, and going to my normal rating scale, on the 5-star scale, this one was really good. I really enjoyed it and I was really pleased to give it 5 out of 5. On my weighted rating scale, for the enjoyment, because of those elements that I really enjoyed and the way it was all brought together, I had a really good time with this, as the 5-star rating shows, so I gave it 18 out of 20. The world building, I gave 16. There are more elements to come into play here that we've seen in The Fall and that weren't kind of reintroduced in Of Blood and Fire, but there's the opportunity with book 2 coming out soon to have more of those elements coming into it. I know there will be more dragons, for instance, so that's a good thing there. So for the world building, I gave 16 out of 20 because what we did get was really well done, but as well as it being the first book in a series, so knowing that there's always more to be built and more to be shown to us, we've had a bit of a snapshot of that, so we can get a bit of an idea of what to expect in later volumes. The characters here, for me, 15 out of 20. I didn't have any characters who I kind of didn't enjoy. I didn't have any of those sections where I wanted to move on and read what was next. And I guess that's because the majority of the book, as I said earlier, is from Cahill's point of view, and I got on with Cahill as a character. The other characters that were involved, whether we saw point of view sections from them or not, I thought they were all well done. There were just a few that could have been a bit more fleshed out that we might see in the future. I think with the characters, there was one of my only real drawbacks that I found from the book, and that was with a section that had an interaction between two characters which kind of seemed a little bit out of nowhere, or it was more a reaction to a previous interaction, but it seemed like it came out of nowhere and was almost thrown in kind of as a last second afterthought. So I'm wondering whether that's going to be as a result of something that's coming in book 2, and this is just a little bit of foreshadowing for it, but it did seem a little bit out of place and it just threw me for a moment when it came up. Just taking a single page or maybe a bit less than a page to show us this and then not have it approached again in the rest of the book. For the plot, I gave 16 out of 20 because I said a few moments ago I really enjoyed the storyline of this. There weren't really any major surprises for me, but there were some really nice elements to it, some things that I really enjoyed, and I'm really looking forward to see how the story progresses with those particular storylines later on in the series. The writing style here I was very much at home with. I thought the prose was absolutely fine. There were no clunky passages or anything along those lines. It was just something that I really found easy reading and quick reading. So I gave this 8 out of 10. And then the pacing was 4 out of 10 because I found it really well paced overall. It had a really good balance, no real slow periods, nothing that was too quick paced, just that really nice balance, and overall the book itself flew by at a really good reading pace for me. And then for my discretionary section, I've given Of Blood and Fire 3 points out of 5 because the cover is not one of my favourites, but it is quite a nice one. It's one that I think really kind of stands out, so I like that aspect of it. With this one though, we've got a nice map, and we know that I like a good map in my fantasy, but we've also got some great artwork. So I read the digital copy of this on my Kindle, and there was a couple of little sections where we had pictures in there from the author's brother, and it's really good quality art and really helps to build a bit of a picture for the depth of this world, even beyond what we're seeing in the written word. I know there's also some additional artwork in the hardcover for the book, for instance, which look really, really nice. So some really good things there. If you get the hardback of this book, it looks like it's a really, really nice one to have on the shelf. And then we also have something which I really appreciate in a book like this. On the author's website, but also I was pleased to see in the back of the ebook, there is a glossary which includes a pronunciation guide. So you get a bit of a character list, some of the races, the words and phrases in the Old Tongue, places and so forth. Not only what they are as a bit of a reminder and what some of the words mean, if it's translations from the Old Tongue, for instance, but also that all-important pronunciation guide, because obviously being in the Old Tongue, some of these are words that you're not going to be familiar with the pronunciation of, so it just gives you a bit of a pointer if you feel that you need one. So overall, that adds up to 80%. 80 out of 100 is a fantastic score. I've been having a really good time of it with the last few books that I've been reading recently, and I'm really happy that this has continued that trend. 80 puts in some really good company at equal 20th on my long list of books that I've reviewed using this weighted scale. So a really great time of it with Of Blood and Fire. If you haven't read this one, I definitely recommend picking up The Fall. Again, this is available for free if you subscribe to the author's newsletter, so definitely take a look at that. It's well worth your time if you like some nice epic fantasy, and especially if you like a classic feel to it. Once you've read that, move on to Of Blood and Fire, and then book 2 in the series is out right at the end of December 2021. That is Of Darkness and Light. I believe this one is, as well as being darker and with more dragons, it's a bigger book as well. I believe it's about 800 pages, so there's plenty here to get your teeth into if you find that you get on with the writing style and you like the story. So if you've read this, drop me a comment down below, let me know what you thought of it, or if you haven't read it yet, what are you looking forward to? Is it on your TBR, and if not, why not? As usual, if you found this video useful, give it a thumbs up, hit subscribe whilst you're down there. I'll catch you in another video soon, I hope, but until then, as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books. Bye for now.